Now it will be. Joe Margolis from. Yeah.
That's a good question, so start from the beginning.
I'm Joseph Margolis from Charlotte, North Carolina.
You got a great accent, by the way.
Thank you.
I haven't found many. There was one guy in the barbecue restaurant who had it hard, and that was maybe because he has to sell ribs, but there's been all these transplants, so I was disappointed, but you got it.
You know, there's a lot of people in the legislature who helped pass this bill who probably have a similar accent too. But a lot of good people too. You made a tweet on March 23rd. I was going through my feed just following what was going on in North Carolina and outside of North Carolina. I saw your name and I knew it from the Startup podcast. And your tweet was planning on coming to North Carolina in May to talk about investments we could make. Now it will be what could have been. And so a lot's happened since then. There's been some meetings with Charlotte council members and the mayor, with legislators here. There's possibility of some sort of compromise on the ordinance from Charlotte that prompted the legislators to write HB2 in the first place. So I gotta kind of have a two-part question. First of all, how does all this look to someone such as yourself? Because that was pretty alarming to me, that someone who can not only has that type of money, but also I imagine you carry a good deal of influence with other investors. How does it look to your community with that? And then what would you say to cities like Charlotte, perhaps areas in Raleigh, Charlotte specifically, because they're sort of being pressured by the legislature to pull back the ordinance that makes public facilities more inclusive as a compromise? What do you think about it overall? And then what would you say going forward to cities like Charlotte?
Yeah, well, the best question all day, no offense. But I'm glad we got an opportunity to talk about it. It was fun. So I was originally scheduled to come to Raleigh to talk to a private gathering of a bunch of institutional investors. So we have, strangely enough, we have a bunch of limited partners. So when you raise a venture fund, you have investors who invest in your fund and then use that money to go invest in startups. But we have a few big investors from this state. And a huge fund of funds. We have, are we allowed to talk about who they are? Okay, so we got Davidson College is an investor of ours. We've got there's a group called Verger that's now Wake Forest's endowment, and they manage some other schools too. We've got a group called TrueBridge, which is one of the biggest fund of funds in the country, headquartered here. And so we were originally coming for a meeting to, I don't usually do meetings and shit and conferences, but they asked us to speak to all their LPs, and so this was on the calendar already. And when HB2 happened, and by the way, the day it passed, it hadn't been totally co-opted in the press to the bathroom bill yet. I was more concerned about just the state overriding any attempt to protect classes that I consider protected classes and should be protected classes, and any civil rights protections, and even minimum wage protections. It was just so out of control. And so the reason I ended up here was I just said, look, I'm going to North Carolina, but I'm not going to get a chance to talk about this out in public at all, because I'm going to be in this fancy room with all these amazing investors and stuff. But it's like, I think they're serving dinner and it's closed the door and all that shit. And I was just like, I want to talk about it out loud. And so it was Linda Stone. I'd met Brooks before, and Linda Stone, who's here, who put us together, and was like, look, if we can get somewhere publicly to talk about it, that'd be great. So I appreciate all you guys gathering to talk about startups and that, as well as this issue. Going back to the vulnerability thing, so I'm going to have a long answer to this because it means a lot to me. Going back to the vulnerability thing, when I was in college at Georgetown, growing up without any money and without a big network, I didn't have a job lined up for me. And so I never really came out politically because I was afraid if I did, I would offend half of my future employers. So though the roots of, it's hard to be exposed to the human condition abroad and not come back more progressive than when you left, right? And it's hard to spend time with poor people in this country and not realize we have a system that is definitely not serving a huge percentage of Americans. And we can squabble over some of the details of policy, and I'm a big fan of Obamacare, and I realize in its final version it was a little bastardized, and it's had an incredible impact on the poor and a shitty impact on some middle-class Americans in raising their premiums. But it's hard not to be exposed to real life and come away feeling more open-minded and feeling like you're a bigger part of a community, and we owe each other a duty and a responsibility. And so part of what came with whatever you call it, my notoriety, my rise, or whatever, my increased visibility was a lot of, I started, I told you it was going to be a long answer, but I started realizing that the first few phases of my life that were so shaky, I was making bad financial decisions, I was in really bad relationships, I was a real pain in the ass to work with for the wrong reasons, not the right reasons. And a lot of that was because I was constantly externally defining myself. I was trying to appease audience after audience. I was trying to impress the guy or gal who could promote me. I was trying to impress an investor or just be somebody else and be different along the way to whoever I was appealing to, kind of like a politician, even though I never had any political aspirations, but I was pandering. And I think one of the things that, as I got into a really healthy relationship with my wife, and as I started to see some business success and started thinking back, why is that working? I realized that it was the authenticity that was working. It was when I was just being me. And so I actually found this kind of real freedom, and it gave me a charge to just shoot my mouth off about things and to start speaking up about things that I think I was really afraid to talk about before. Or I was afraid, like, hey, I'm going to piss some people off. Even today, I made a tweet a half hour ago about, like, first bathroom in North Carolina, and nobody was here to check my junk. Like, I'm kind of let down, And I showed it to Matt first and was like, are we going to offend anybody with this? He's like, of course you are, but that's you. Like, send that, And I think there was something really empowering about being able to take stands on some of these issues. I mean, my mentions on Twitter are a hellhole, right? As a progressive Hillary supporter who's out in front on some of these issues, like, I get a modicum of the abuse that a woman gets on Twitter or a person of color does, but it's fucking nasty. And as someone who spent a lot of time with D-Ray and the Black Lives Matter movement and Netta and, and Sean King and stuff like that, like, I'm on all the white supremacist hit lists. And as somebody who on Shark Tank said we need to encourage more women to get into engineering and math and science, I'm an enemy of the men's rights movement, which I didn't realize was a movement until I became their enemy. But there was something very empowering about saying, I have this motto now that's like, I'm not here to convince you anymore. Like, I don't need any of your support. I don't need you to believe in me for any bullshit reason. This is me. I mean, people ask about the shirts. Like, I didn't grow up as a cowboy. I was on my way to give a speech once, and I stopped in the Reno airport and bought one of these shirts, the one you see in my Twitter avatar. And it was 80% off for obvious reasons. And I wore it to give a talk, and I walked on stage, and I didn't say a thing about it, and everyone was like, and I just realized, this is awesome, man, because the number one risk in my job is taking yourself too seriously. And now nobody here is taking me too seriously, and I just got to earn it from them. Like, and the only way I'm going to earn it is if I'm authentically me, is if they get a taste of who I am, right? And so I say that as the context and the prelude for why a tweet like that can come out. Like, I feel like it's not necessarily a Californian tweet, or I live a lot of time in LA now. It's not even it's not like from inside the San Francisco or the LA bubble, and it's not like the Californian gay agenda or New York values or any of that bullshit. It's just somebody who gets exposed to the human condition and who just now is like, I don't give a shit who I piss off right now. If I feel like I'm going to speak up on what I feel is an obvious injustice, motivated from real hate by people who disproportionately tend to put Christian in their bio on Twitter, despite how the extent to which they controvert the principles of Christianity that I grew up learning about. I'm gonna say it. And if I can get Mark Benioff to tweet about it and pull his office out of this area, if I can get PayPal to pull their commitment back, I'm gonna do it. Because there's two things that these politicians respond to. It's attention and commerce. We all talked about it. Like, this is not we don't take this shit lightly. This is our country, and we see it kind of being ripped away from the people who have the least skin in the game right now, right? And again, like, By the way, it was amazing. I wasn't in town 30 minutes before I met transgender North Carolinian. I don't know if you guys know Ray at all, but Ray Hellinger, who works out of HQ Raleigh. Like, that was awesome, Ray. It was really special to meet you. Came up right in the barbecue place and said hi, and I was like, holy shit, this all just became a lot less hypothetical, you know? You think about how hard it is to be a transgender person in the South to start with, and then layer on this whole layer, like how often they're the subject of violence and abuse, and then layer on all this kind of shit, and rumors that there's a governor's hotline to call in people who are going into the wrong bathroom and shit like that. I mean, it's just, that ended up not being true, but that kind of culture of fear and antagonism, right? And then you look deeper into that bill and you're just like, God damn, who aren't they after right now? Like, who isn't being excluded on it? And I think there's a couple different ways you can respond to that. One is, if you are a governor who's going to pass yourself off as being pro-business and pro-development and pro-commerce and all this stuff, well, what if all the business people said, fuck off? What if all the business people said, we're not going to go and line up behind your agenda and pretend this is a great place to do business, a place where we can't recruit the kinds of people we want to work in our facilities. We can't attract the best founders here because you've supported an agenda that repels them, and they're going to go to other places to work. And we can't gather our friends here in good conscience. I mean, we heard this morning about one of your most successful companies in town wants to throw a conference, but they're a partner of Salesforce, and they can't get Salesforce employees here. So what are they going to do? And as a result, I've also supported the entertainers who haven't stopped through here. I'm sure that sucks for those of you who like going to Bruce Springsteen concerts and stuff, but that hurts. Like, politicians get enough of these black eyes, and it matters. I mean, think about the political game. At the end of the day, it's give as much money as you can to buy as many, so they can buy as many TV ads as they can to change the narrative. Well, SOPA, do you remember Stop SOPA? That was the first time that I saw that turned on its head. It's like nobody had any money to dedicate to SOPA, but Chris Dodd just had his head blown off as a result of trying to pursue that stuff. He didn't know what hit him because the internet spoke, and the internet said, look, this is a voting issue for us, and it matters, and we're going to show up. And I think the traditional political establishment doesn't understand social still. They don't understand the power of social media, and they still underestimate the extent to which you all go out and vote. And I think if you really want to get serious about this stuff, you can hit them with the attention, and you can show the material impact it has on your state. And this is why we go back to that answer I gave on diversity. Like, there is a reason to support diversity that is rooted in the history of our culture, fundamental fairness. I would even argue the principles of Christianity and fairness and equality and the roots of our democracy. But even if you're so goddamn cold-hearted, you don't believe in all that stuff, I think there's a greed motivation for it. And I want the same test to be applied to legislation like this. Just say, even if you are so goddamn fearful, even if you're so insecure about your own sexual orientation, even if you're so willing to buy into these myths about predators, even if you are so willing to ignore the poverty rate in this state and the high school dropout rate in this state and the teenage pregnancy rate in this state and the unemployment rate in this state and the lack of access to medical care in this state and the status of the crumbling infrastructure in the state, if you are so willing to ignore all that other shit because of some grudge, because of some populist fear-mongering bullshit about a population of people that you have not even been willing to extend and understand to, and you're going to exclude not just people on the basis of this bathroom bullshit, but you're going to make it impossible for any community to self-determine if they want to protect some of their residents. You're going to make it impossible for them to create special considerations for minimum wage and for working conditions and anything like that, then you should fucking suffer for it. Yeah, you just asked, so what would you say to Charlotte City Council? I mean, well, look, this... Yeah, it was. I mean, it was interesting because before I came in, I went to. Must have offended all these people. See you later. Just kidding. I know you got meetings. Right before I got here, I wanted to make sure I read the Wikipedia page and read all the tweets to make sure I was up to date on the very latest. It's really, Wikipedia is amazing like that. It really does stay current on stuff like this because the ACLU sued this morning too. But I just think ultimately, the electorate has shifted in a direction that the traditional power structure just hasn't yet admitted, right? And we're seeing the last death knells, I think, of the white populist movement. I get called white apologist and all these things are male, but a cuckold I get called on Twitter all the time, et cetera. But I just feel like we've had this hierarchy for the longest time that just self-perpetuated with fundraising, et cetera, making decision after decision on behalf of all of us. But all of us have changed dramatically. And all of us have started to realize how unfair some elements of our society are. And all of us have started to realize, like, look, there's a lot of externalities to business that don't get accounted for in the balance sheet, like pollution, right? And poverty. And people who, think of how many people your parents' age had careers, had small businesses. Well, now all those small businesses are Home Depot and Family Dollar and Dollar General, and the most you can be is a greeter with no bennies. And so I think we have an electorate that's awakened to that, right? I'm a Hillary supporter, but mostly because Bernie just can't get the delegates. And I really appreciate what he brought to the table in terms of the questions he raised. And I say that as somebody who's going to pay a lot more fucking taxes either way. But I appreciate what he raised, and I think it's amazing how he awakened a lot of people in the electorate this time around. I appreciate what the 99% movement was bringing to the table. Each one of them you can nitpick about some of their techniques and their tactics and the papers they put out there, but this is a really important conversation to have. And increasingly, they're representative of the majority of Americans. And I think they're not the Americans who run the media. They're not the Americans who own the reality television shows yet. And they're not Americans who smear their names on the sides of buildings. But they will be soon enough. And I think ultimately, when you are in a city like Charlotte who's trying to push back, you're in a city here, you're anywhere in the state, I think you have to be loud about it. I think you have to be motivated about it. I think you have to register people to vote in a state where they make it so goddamn hard for anyone to vote intentionally because they know that young people and people of color aren't going to show up. And I think you got to just subvert the traditional system and say you can buy all the fucking late night television ads you want that sit right next to like the Medicare scooter ads for all the old people who are going to vote that way anyway. But we're going to get people out by Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat, and we're going to get people out because we have a personal relationship with them on this issue. By the way, this isn't hypothetical. I speak, California had Prop 8 passed right underneath it. I mean, you think about, so where is a haven for same-sex, relationships like San Francisco's legendary for, right? And we had the Mormon Church come in, and the Catholic Church actually too co-funded it, and funded a movement right out from under us. We didn't motivate on it. Luckily we got our shit together, and got people out to the polls, and we won that thing. And I know you guys can do it here. I like you being here. I'll do more time. What's going on? Anyone have a microphone for that guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, right on, Joe.
I'll run it over. Who's that? Yeah.